children that you're talking about, right?
It is really like talking about my children.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very proud of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It seemed like when you create videos too, it's like our children.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and the editing process is really interesting. You know, kind of searching for a rhythm. And are we rolling?
No.
Oh, okay.
We're just talking.
Oh, okay, cool. Because I could kind of talk. I could say a little bit about rhythm,
Well, then let's go.
which sort of relates to.
Okay.
Go.
Yeah. So, in the way that music is rhythmic, I feel like my art pieces, both my 2D art pieces and my sculptures, have a certain rhythm. The title of this show is Repose, and they're really poses. I mean, they are like a dancer would do. And in fact, I've had shows where dancers actually interacted with the work. The reason it's a repose is I have shown most of these pieces in other settings. So it was a way to reinterpret them, and it was a really interesting opportunity to do it in this really beautiful space here. And then the secondary meaning of repose is rest. And I just moved from Chicago to Houston, which was a massive undertaking. And I was also sort of thinking about these pieces sort of relaxing a little bit.
Awesome. You mentioned that I lost my train of thought. It was your second answer. Oh, you've shown them in multiple locations. What are some of the locations where you've shown your work, and have you gotten similar feedback in these locations? Like, for example, this is a collegiate atmosphere, you know?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So this specific work I've shown at the Chicago Artists Coalition, which is a kind of an artist run space. It's been around in Chicago for years and years. And a lot of artists attend those openings, and I was part of a residency. So I got a lot of feedback from artists themselves. Showing in a collegiate, university or college atmosphere is very similar. It's not a commercial gallery where the goal is to sell necessarily. I mean, for me, the goal of this work is for other people to experience it and learn from it. And I'm always excited to show my work in educational environments because the students are so open to learning new things and to experiencing new things.
Awesome, great answer. Eric, how's everything looking? Good?
It's good. Don't knock my tripod.
Just making sure. I know, it was my phone. Sorry about that. I'm in this little tiny space here, my little corner.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and continue. One thing, too, that I forgot to ask you to do, but you've been doing, is just to answer incomplete sentences.
Oh, okay, good.
So we'll go ahead and actually start the interview
Yeah.
now. I guess officially start. So can you tell me your name and how you found out about this gallery at South Suburban College?
Yes, my name is Brent Fogt, and I found out about this gallery through Eric Tucker, who is an art professor here. He had seen my work in other settings and invited me to do a show here, and so I was very honored with the invitation and excited about doing the exhibition here.
I'm going to move the light just a little farther.
Okay.
As you're moving your head, I am catching glares.
Okay.
How is it now, Eric?
Let's do that question again, and I'll keep an eye on the glasses.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good.
Oh, it's the glasses?
Well, it's just that, here.
They're supposed to be
I
non-glare.
need to tilt up a bit. You just.
The ones I moved.
That
Yep,
one?
sorry. I can scoot back down.
No, it's fine.
Wherever you're comfortable.
All right. I'm a fidgety sort of person.
Are you? Yeah, I talk with my hands a lot too.
Yeah, I totally do.
Yeah, that's why it's good having this, because it like makes me do this
Mhm.
rather than this.
Hey,
Do I work?
sit in the shot.
I work
I
with my
know.
hands, so let me know when you're ready.
All right, let's try that again. And
Okay.
I'll keep an eye on the glasses and see if we.
I'll try to kind of stay.
You don't have to. I like the animation,
Okay.
so it's not so dry.
Yeah.
But it's anytime you start putting your face towards this way, I start seeing it all.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Uh,
Yeah, so I could ask that one more time. So
Okay.
can you tell me your name and how you found out about this gallery at South Suburban College?
My name is Brent Fogt, and Eric Tucker, who's a professor here, reached out to me about the possibility of having a show. and was honored to be contacted and excited about showing in a brand new space.
Awesome. How was that, Eric?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay. How did you come up with the title? You talked a little bit about this, but can you explain more about how you came up with the title Repose?
Yes, definitely. So the whole notion of posing these sculptures is really important to me. When I make these pieces, I think about how we as humans stand, walk, balance, and so there really are poses or gestures. And I called this Repose because I have shown these pieces in other settings, so it was an opportunity to sort of do it again in a new way. And then the other meaning of repose is to rest, and I've just been thinking a lot about that because I've had a lot of change in my life. I've just made a move from Chicago to Houston, and just lots of changes happening. So I kind of needed a rest.
Absolutely. Can you tell me about the process of creating the work in this gallery?
Yeah, I'm a very hands-on person. A lot of artists will think, okay, what do I want to make? And they will sketch it out and figure out how they're going to make it. I kind of work in a backwards way. And so I really don't know what I'm making when I start. I start off with materials, I combine them, I put them aside. I combine other materials, I put them aside. And then I combine the combined materials until eventually I come up with something, maybe a sculpture, maybe the beginning of a sculpture. I continue to work, and I work on multiple pieces at a time until I feel like the piece is finished. And it's hard to know sometimes whether the piece is finished. And some of these pieces I will probably add on or subtract later. These pieces will have another life in another setting.
Would you ever combine two of the pieces that we see behind you?
Sure. Do you have any ideas on which ones I should combine?
No, I was just curious. Yeah, if you want to silence that.
Yeah, I am. Hold on. I'm sorry, but I did.
Man, that right there was amazing.
That was the best part ever. We need to redo it.
That's cool.
Yeah. No.
Is your voice going to be in it?
No, I won't
okay.
be in it. It's all you. Yeah. No, people don't want to hear me. They don't care
Sure,
about what I
you have a
to
much
say.
nicer voice than I do.
They don't care about me.
Let's see what we're talking about. Oh yeah, yeah. Some of these pieces, as I mentioned earlier, will have another life, and they may be combined. They may be dissected and recombined in a different way. But every time I work with a piece that I've worked with before, I'm adding on to it, I'm taking away. It has a history that I like to build on.
How do you decide which pieces are going to have color like this vibrant, almost like a reddish orange color or like a yellow? How do you decide which pieces are going to have colors like that and which are just going to be more natural?
I tend to add color to areas of intersection to highlight where things come together, particularly where different things come together. And I overlap the color to create a third shape. So let's say a piece of wood intersects with a piece of concrete. So you have two pieces there, but by adding color to both of them, you create almost a third area or a third shape. So it's a way to complicate the pieces a little bit.
Is there a reason for selecting the colors that you select?
Well, that's a really interesting question because I'm actually partially colorblind. So color is a really challenging area for me, and I rely a lot on just kind of my natural inefficiency with color. So I realize that like other people will see color differently than I will. I try to kind of use that as an advantage. So I tend to choose colors that I can see really well. There are certain greens and grays and even blues and oranges that all sort of fuse and look the same to me. So I tend to use colors that I can really see, and they tend to be very vibrant pinks and reds and things like that. The other thing that helps is if you choose colors that one might be darker than another. So colors with a different value, like more of a towards white, more towards black. But I'm interested in showing the natural surfaces of the objects that I use, but then also sort of layering them with additional information. And also I just think color is really fun, and it's fun to experiment with.
Let's get a new sentence for the opening of that, because it was answered. That's a good question, because I happen to be colorblind. I'd like to use
Just
that.
use
Oh,
the
yeah.
colorblind part.
Yeah, maybe something along the lines of, I happen to be colorblind, so choosing colors, and then just
Yeah,
give me a
okay, sure.
sentence.
Yeah, to fit into the rest of the stuff,
Yeah.
sure. Well, I happen to be colorblind, so choosing colors is actually quite a challenge for me. And I use different apps on my phone. One is called Cone, that actually allows me to take a photo of a color that I'm using, and it tells me what color it is and where it is on the CMYK scale or RGB, or even gives me the specific Pantone color. So I use things like that to help choose colors so that I kind of know what I'm doing. I also rely a lot on other artists who might be around and run the ideas by them. But more than anything, I just sort of rely on my own sense of what color is, my own very unique sense of what color is.
Have you always been colorblind, or is that something that kind of developed?
No, I always have, and I think I'm getting more colorblind as I get older. And for years, I really avoided color. I did very, very detailed pen and ink drawings, really massive pen and ink drawings that were, all done in black and white. And so I just thought a lot about value and how, when you make something dark, it tends to sometimes move up in sort of the picture plane, sometimes move back, how contrast works. And so after I'd done that for a while, I thought, okay, I think I'm ready to pursue color, even though it's problematic for me. And it's interesting.
Huh, that is really interesting. Do you think that with you becoming more colorblind, that's going to positively impact your work? If so, can you tell me about that?
I hope that becoming increasingly colorblind will positively impact my work, but the jury's still out on that.
All right, let's get back to the questions then, or else we'll be here all day talking. So can you tell me how long you've been sculpting and what originally made you want to get into it?
I have been working on sculpture pretty much from the beginning. I've been making art now for about 25 years, quarter of a century, and I just want to honor that right now, here, 25 years. And I started out working in clay, and worked with that for a long time, and then moved into found materials, things that I would find on the street. I've worked with clothing, I've worked with shoes, and I alternate between working sculpturally and working, I've worked in painting, I've done a lot of drawing. Right now I'm doing a lot of collage. To keep this whole art process sustainable, I really have to mix things up and change a lot. I have a very short attention span, so I have to constantly be challenging myself in different ways. And so, yes, I've been sculpting for 25 years, but I've been doing a lot of other things too, including photography, which I didn't even mention. But in most of my art, I really like to do hands-on work. I really like the tactility of working with materials. So even collages are very much about that. And then maybe because in my day job, I do a lot of work on the computer and I'm designing on the computer. And so I wouldn't want my art practice to be a continuation of that. I really want to be using my body and my hands when I work.
I know we talked about it a little bit before the interview, but can you tell me a little about your day job?
I'd be happy to. I'm the marketing manager for Horizons for Youth. We're a nonprofit organization in the center of Chicago. We work with kids from low-income neighborhoods to help them have amazing lives, go to college. We help with scholarships, counseling, we provide them with amazing mentors, and we're working with about 250 kids right now. And there's a huge need for this sort of thing. We're really just sort of scratching the surface, but I feel really, really good about that job. And so I help them tell their story, particularly visually. I do some writing as well, but I make videos. I do graphics for them, social media, built them a website, and so it's a nice way to use my visual skills to kind of help the greater society.
That's awesome. What made you originally kind of want to go down that path?
My parents were both very socially engaged people. My dad is a Lutheran pastor, and my mom is a social worker. So sort of continuing that legacy. I also worked in politics myself for 10 years before I decided to go to art school. And I have degrees in political science and international relations in addition to my 2 art degrees. So.
Cool. That's interesting. Yeah. So both of your parents are kind of in that field too.
Oh yeah.
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 Can you tell me why you choose to work abstractly through experimentation?
Yes. So I don't feel like my pieces are completely abstract because they have recognizable elements in them. I used to work completely abstractly in my drawings. I mean, there were really no references to like everyday objects and things like that. They could be interpreted as microscopic organisms or continents, things like that. And I worked completely abstractly for a long time. But I wanted to give the viewer something else to sort of hang on to, something recognizable as an entry point into the work. And whereas the pieces use functional objects, they're no longer functional. They act as objects. But I want the viewer to ask, why would the artist combine a chair leg with a piece of clothing, or why would they combine a chair leg with a piece of concrete? I mean, these are sort of illogical things to combine. And I'm interested in these odd juxtapositions because I feel like the world is like that. It's not rational, and I try to think about kind of the world and the way I'm living in it. Because it is so irrational, I try to look for kind of the absurdities, and I feel like some of these pieces, I try to make them as elegant as I can using sort of crude materials. But I also try to inject a bit of a sense of humor into them as well, like a certain quirkiness or oddness.
And then I don't know if you want to go ahead and get a drink, and then we could go ahead.
Oh yeah.
Can you just so you
good idea.
Yeah. We're like halfway through.
I would like to request of you when this is done. I don't know what
Yeah.
you have access to, but I was just envisioning putting this together when I was done. When we were talking about the color and how you had traditionally done pen and inks, I think you said in all black and white. Do you have a nice piece that you could send to us that was photographed that maybe I could transpose from the black and white into a very colorful piece?
Oh, sure.
Talking?
Yeah,
And
be
then
happy
maybe
to.
also some pictures, if possible. I don't want to, because I know minors are probably involved. But if there's any pictures that talk about what you do with the
all of our students sign a release form, because
cool.
we use them in a lot of our. Yeah, I got tons of stuff, and I've even got
if
B-roll
you have, like, 2 nice
and
pictures or
video.
something.
I've even got B-roll
Okay.
if you want.
Yeah, something.
I got tons.
Because basically this is going to go into something that we call an artist spotlight. So it's going to be about you as well as your pieces.
No, but I'd love to give some publicity to the organization as well. We just had there's a show on ESPN called E60, and it's kind of like, are you familiar with it?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
I
we
love
were
those
just
stories.
featured on that. I was sort of indirectly, but on last Sunday morning at 8 a.m. It's sort of a tragic story. You may be aware of it, but there was a Notre Dame student filming a football game 7 or 8 years ago and was knocked down, and he
Oh,
The
died.
whole thing
Tower.
fell over,
Yeah.
Yeah, I
didn't
remember
it?
that.
Yeah.
Well, so that was Declan Drum Sullivan, and after that happened, the Sullivan family, his parents, they were getting this outpouring, of grief, and Notre Dame was very concerned about, getting sued, but they didn't want to do that. They didn't feel good about that, but a lot of funds came in, so they set up a fund in their son's name, and most of the money they give is to our organization. And they've funded over 90 students, and so that now we call that Declan's Legacy or Declan's Class of 90 or whatever. But yeah, so we've gotten some really, really good publicity this past weekend, and I'm responsible for the social media, and it's been wonderful. I mean, it's an awful, awful story, but I just admire the family so much for trying to turn it into something positive.
Yeah, I'd love to include something like that.
Was Declan a part of the organization? Is that how?
Not originally, but there were some of Tim Coffey was a good friend of Declan's growing up, and he'd been involved in Horizons for Youth for years, and Father had been. And there was a strong Notre Dame connection with Horizons for Youth from the beginning, because at least my brother-in-law was actually one of the founders, and then he went to U of I, but a couple of the founders were Notre Dame grads, so there's always been this big Notre Dame connection. So it was kind of, and then more like Bennett Academy, which is a Catholic school in the western suburbs, a lot of them went there, and anyway, and Mr. Sullivan went there. So there's all this kind of, Notre Dame mafia, kind of stuff, and I'm not a really part of that, but hey, we're taking advantage of it all we can.
Absolutely, that's so cool. Yeah, I love those E60 stories.
Yeah,
They're awesome.
yeah,
they have such great
they really
content.
are. So I don't know when they're going to be replaying. They replayed it yesterday. I think they're playing it one more time today.
It makes sense because Notre Dame was the opening game this past week.
And I'm a Michigan fan.
So is my husband, a huge Michigan fan.
That's where I got my MFA.
Oh really? Yeah, oh my gosh, I wasn't home, and I'm thankful because he
Probably bet him in
freaked
tick.
out. It's awful, man.
No, I'm with him. I was shocked, especially because we could go into this for a long time, but their defense, and Notre Dame just picked it apart.
Yeah.
First half.
From the very beginning, within the first 2 minutes, they scored a touchdown.
It was awful. I was at a Michigan bar in Houston. There were all these Michigan people that were wearing their shirts, and we're like, yeah. And it was, the mood was, yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah.
I bet. Yeah, pretty awful.
Yeah, totally.
I was thankful I was not at home because my poor dogs. I'm sure Nick was going crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's over it by now.
Oh, he is, yeah. But still,
they can still have a really great season.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, technically Notre Dame was ranked above them
in some polls.
And I think being at home helps Notre Dame huge. I feel like every time they play at home and they've got their people there, I mean.
It is. And one thing we do with Horizons for Youth, every year we take a group of students down there, and it is so cool. We get on the football field before the game starts, play touch football, and then they get to meet the player. I mean, it's like Reggie Brooks, who is a running back, I think All-American, played pro for a while. He meets with them, and I mean, it's amazing. So,
that's so cool.
Notre Dame does a lot of really great stuff for us.
Could I have you scooch in your chair a little bit? Turn your body
Toward me?
Well, I'm seeing the window now on the side of
Oh,
this
like
sheet.
this way?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I might need to tilt just a tad here.
Right here.
No, thanks.
New tripod.
Oh. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
All right. So can you tell me about some art styles and artists that have influenced your work and why they're so influential to you?
Yeah, I'd say probably the most significant one is Eva Hesse. She was considered a post-minimalist sculptor, working primarily in the 60s. What I like about her so much is, she started off as a painter, and I did too. I really thought that was what I was supposed to do. And then she made this really interesting transition from doing paintings to doing these sort of relief paintings where she would use, rope and twine and objects like that so that the paintings are sort of coming off the wall. And then the next step was into experimenting with all kinds of materials, ropes and fibers, and ultimately latex. And she's just made some incredible works, building on what the minimalists did in the mid-60s. And the minimalists were primarily working with steel and manufactured materials. And she gave the minimalism a heart, it was like these really gorgeous materials that you felt really viscerally. And that's, I admire her sense of experimentation and admire the the form she made. A more contemporary artist is Mark Bradford, and he works with found objects, the way that I do, works in collage, works in sculpture. And what I really like about his work is he combines all kinds of materials, particularly in his collages, and then he sands them down to kind of reveal layers and reveal history. And so his process is really important, but the work is way more about the process. They're gorgeous as paintings as well. And I'm very interested in process, but that's also not enough for me. I want the work to be visually compelling as well.
Awesome. I'm just going to have you just restate that very first sentence in a complete sentence. So if I could have you say one of the artists that I'm really influenced by, and then just say her name, and we'll cut it together.
Okay, cool. Oh, well. One of the artists I'm really influenced by is Eva Hesse.
Great, thank you. And then what objects do you use to create your work? What found objects do you usually use?
I'm primarily interested in collecting furniture. The reason I'm interested in that is the relationship of furniture to the human body. It's like the chair I'm sitting on right now. Furniture supports us. It also, it has arms, it has legs. The terminology is very similar to our own terminology that we have for human bodies. I also like that a lot of furniture, particularly chairs, are very linear in nature, and so for me they become almost like bones that I'm able to put together and then paint and fabric, and anything that I put on it is like skin.
That's interesting. I had no idea. That's really
I just made that up on the spot. No, I've thought about that before.
It's like that Kleenex box you just bought.
Yeah.
I do. I just bought this super cool Kleenex box. I was at Renaissance Fair this weekend, and they took leather and wrapped it around a Kleenex box and molded the leather to look like a face, and had holes for eyes, and put in fake looking eyes. This thing is the coolest thing.
You got it?
I got it. Yeah, I had to.
Sounds great.
It was like $70. I didn't care though.
Whatever.
It's functional.
Yeah.
It holds my Kleenex.
I know.
Fancy way to hold my Kleenex.
And you need it in the winter.
Seriously, yeah. Or seasonal allergies in the fall.
Yeah, that too.
All right. So why do you choose to use objects like fallen tree branches, discarded furniture, clothing, these types of cast-off materials to create your sculptures?
Yeah. So I use these cast-off materials because they already have some kind of history before I even get them. So I'm merely adding to that history. There's also a notion of recycling and reusing, and I'm not making environmental work, but I do feel like that's important. There's so much material that's already out there available. I also love the idea of transforming something that might be sort of ordinary or pedestrian into something potentially extraordinary. Not all my pieces reach that level, but every once in a while, I feel like I've really transformed some kind of something into nothing. So there becomes this sort of almost an alchemy or magic that is involved, and I think it's there. I really do.
And then can you explain how you create a whole or near whole while working on your sculptures? This is one of the things that you mentioned on your website.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of, let me think about that.
Yeah, you mentioned like by testing how individual components can be severed, joined, overlapped, or combined is what you were talking about online in order to create this whole or near whole.
Yeah. I feel like some of my pieces are complete and some are really sort of incomplete, and intentionally so. So I like some pieces to look like they aren't missing anything, but I like other pieces to look like there's something missing, and perhaps the viewer can sort of fill in the blank to what is missing. I feel like it adds a certain level of mystery to the viewer's experience.
This next question may be a little bit silly because obviously you use
I like
nails
silly.
for, wood and that sort of thing, but I'm wondering how you decide which pieces will be screwed together, which pieces will be wrapped together, or which pieces will be crocheted together. How you determine which will have, these features.
So when I have a couple of parts, fragments, scraps, I put them together. I kind of play around with them and try to figure out a way that they seem to naturally come together. And sometimes making the connection warrants, screwing something together. Sometimes there might be a way to do it more simply and more kind of informally by wrapping it. I try to use the simplest method possible to connect things. There are also some aesthetic choices that I want to make. Like sometimes I might feel like a piece needs texture, and so I might use rope to add that sort of texture. And then I might feel like, well, then I feel like it also needs color. I try to do sort of the least amount that I need to do to make the work compelling to me and hopefully to the viewer.
Interesting. The next question that I have is actually one of the ones that I'm most interested in learning about. Your pieces aren't necessarily just like all on the floor flat. You decide to lean a lot of them up against the wall, or some of them almost appear to be like hanging from the ceiling and that sort of thing. So when do you decide if the piece is to be hung from the ceiling, laid against a wall, or just rest on the floor? And why do you decide to display them differently?
I tend to work on different parts of a room's architecture in my studio, for instance. So I might start off with just ceiling pieces, and so I'll work on a series of ceiling pieces because I'm interested in exploring the relationship between the objects themselves and the ceiling. And then other times I want the work to feel more grounded. Right now, the kind of work I'm working on is very grounded, and it's very floor-based, and it has to do with just what I'm interested in at the time. The wall, I love working with walls because they can support so much weight. Really support more weight than ceiling because the weight is distributed between the wall and the floor. Some of it is just physics and trying things out. I'm also very aware of the history of sculpture, where so many pieces were built on pedestals and were grounded. And, one of the very first sculptors to work against that was Alexander Calder, who had what he called, his mobiles, which he hung from the ceiling. And I'm a big fan of that work. I also like how when you hang a work from the ceiling, the air currents make it move. But I tend to work on, I kind of focus on one part of a room, the room's architecture, but then when it comes for an exhibition, I'm thinking about the entire space. And at that point, I have to think about composing, literally composing. It's almost like composing a three-dimensional drawing when you go into an exhibition space. And so I might have lots of pieces that are supposed to hang from the ceiling, but they don't really work as a composition, so maybe they become wall-leaning pieces. So it's kind of like producing like a line drawing, but with sculpture.
Interesting. You mentioned hanging a lot of the pieces. I think Eric usually hangs quite a few of his pieces that he creates,
does.
and they spin, and
Yeah.
that sort of thing, and it gives you kind of a different perspective when you do that. And
Yeah.
that's cool too.
And his wall work, changes depending upon, where you are, like, the lines. He does these kind of three-dimensional boxes, and those move as well.
Yeah. Can you tell me the story? I know we were talking before how these are like your children.
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
like, this is going to be like pretty much pick your favorite child. But can you tell me the story behind one of the pieces in this show and kind of how you came up with
Do you mind
that
if I
concept?
just like look
Yeah, you could go
back,
ahead and
then
look.
I'll try not to mess up my.
Yeah. You've got
my
another
spot.
one that's on the floor over there that's looks like maybe the part of a rocking chair. It's purple. There's one on the other side that
yeah.
looks like that.
Yeah, let's see. Which one should I talk about?
It'd probably be cool if it was one of the ones in the background here.
Yeah, can you see the ladder piece?
You could see the ladder, right, Eric?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's been in the shot the whole time.
Yeah.
Can you see this piece?
Yeah, we see the top part of that piece.
Okay. Oh, I know what I can do. All right.
But we'll
I got
show it. We'll show the piece in its entirety too. We'll layer
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Yeah. So there are always interesting stories behind where I find the materials. So I found a lot of these materials in the back alley of my apartment building in Chicago, which shared a space with a jewel, Osco, and it was just amazing. Right around the time when people move, I would find all these chairs, and at first I needed chairs for my back porch, and this is before I was really working with chairs artistically, and so I had a number of these chairs just sitting on my back porch, and then one of them broke, and rather than fix it or throw it away, I just thought, oh, well, maybe I could make sculpture out of that. And so that was kind of the first one where I started working with that. And then once people found out that I was working with found materials and found furniture, people were offering me all kinds of things, including my niece's baby bed, which I have incorporated into a couple of the pieces that are right behind me. And so it's always sort of exciting for them to come to one of my shows, and they're able to see and identify with something that's in a piece of artwork. And it means more to me too that it's not just anyone's history that I've incorporated into a piece by virtue of collecting objects, but someone from my family.
That's cool. The bed that you're talking about, is that in the piece behind you, this gray and red?
It's actually like, do you see those slats that are right
Yes.
there? It's that one right there. And then also that kind of boat looking piece that's over on the
Yes.
other side. That was the headboard to it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was like some sort of rocking chair.
No, it
thing.
looks like, but it was actually the headboard. I just broke the headboard and then it kind of extended it. Right.
Cool. And then what were some of the benefits of displaying your artwork here at South Suburban College?
Well, the space here at South Suburban College is absolutely gorgeous. White walls, beautiful floors. Ceilings are not too high, which makes it a little easier to install things. But just knowing that students are walking by and looking in, and classes are coming in, and that some of this work actually influence some of the projects that were done in some of the art classes. That's really gratifying and inspiring to me. And I used to teach myself. I taught at Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi for 3 years. And I've also taught kids at Horizons for Youth, the organization that I work for. And so I really love showing work in educational settings where there's learning going on.
What would you say is the best piece of advice that you can give to South Suburban College students, art students? My biggest advice to art students here and everywhere is, one, to work really hard and to be consistent in your art practice. Set time aside and work, whether you feel like it or not, so just you get into the habit of working. I also would suggest working on more than one piece at a time so that you don't get overly invested in one piece, trying to make it a masterpiece. I feel like if you're working on 2 or 3 pieces at a time, it kind of takes the pressure off. I'd also say if you hit a kind of a stopping point with a piece, just put it aside and start working on something else. I'm gonna stop there and get a glass of water because I've got some other kind of stuff. I could talk about this for a long time, but I'm gonna. Sure. Yeah, do your thing.
How we doing?
Good.
I moved a little bit.
Yep, hang on. This lock.
I know it slides a little bit. I
Yeah.
don't know what's up with it.
All right.
Ready?
Yep.
Another piece of advice I would have is to think about how you're going to be able to sustain your art practice over time. Some artists are independently wealthy. I was not. And so I knew that I was going to have some kind of way to support myself. So take advantage of all the digital art classes that you can. There are always jobs for people who know computer graphics, can lay out pages, can edit photographs, and that sort of thing. So if you want to have a visual career along with being an artist, I'd recommend taking advantage of those kinds of classes whenever they're offered here, and developing a portfolio of work that you could parlay into a job. And then you really have the best of both worlds. You have a job that you like, where you're contributing to a team's mission, but then you also have your own art practice. It's completely yours, and you can take it wherever you want to go with it.
And we talked about a whole bunch of different things today.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to add about your art, or anything else that you would like to expand on?
I'd like to thank South Suburban College and specifically Eric Tucker for inviting me to have this exhibition. It's been a wonderful experience, and I would love to do it again.
Thank you so much. Anything you'd like to ask Eric?
No, just that, again, whatever you can get, B-roll.
Yeah.
And
Let me,
with a footage, and maybe a sample of your black and whites.
Yeah. Let me just give you a card just as a way to.
I'm gonna start